The mall was bustling with energy, bright lights, cheerful chatter, and the hum of life moving at full speed. But for 14-year-old Jamie, a simple trip to buy a gift for his father turned into something he would never forget. One moment, he was admiring a sleek black leather watch, imagining his dad's smile as he opened it. The next, he found himself accused, humiliated, and dragged into an unjust confrontation that would leave him questioning everything. What started as an act of love became a moment of prejudice, testing Jamie's strength and resilience in ways he could have never expected. A mother's unwavering determination to defend her son, a guard's cold compliance, a store manager's sharp words and piercing judgment. And through it all, a young boy trying to hold on to his belief in kindness, even as the world around him seemed to prove otherwise. Before we dive into this gripping story of courage, forgiveness, and the battle against unfair judgment, comment below where you're watching from today. And if this story inspires you as much as it did us, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another impactful tale. The warm afternoon sunlight spilled through the curtains of the small, cozy living room, creating patterns on the walls. Jamie, a thoughtful 14-year-old boy, sat cross-legged on the sofa, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. He scrolled through an online catalog with a sense of focus uncommon for his age. After a moment, he called out, his voice tinged with excitement. "Mom, I've got an idea," he exclaimed, sitting up straighter. Caroline, his mother, emerged from her home office, her professional blazer sharp and her demeanor calm. A state senator with a schedule that left little room for idle moments, Caroline valued these snippets of time with her son. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his tone. "What's this brilliant idea, Jamie?" she asked with a smile. Jamie hesitated for a moment, suddenly shy. "Well, it's Dad's birthday tomorrow, and I want to get him something unforgettable, a really special gift." Caroline crossed her arms, her expression softening. "That's a wonderful thought, sweetheart. What do you have in mind?" "Bookmark, go back. A watch," Jamie said earnestly. "His old one isn't working properly anymore, and he always says how much he misses having a good one." Caroline nodded, clearly impressed by her son's thoughtfulness. "That's a fantastic idea. How about we pick one out together?" "Really?" Jamie's face lit up. "You'd come with me to the mall?" "Of course," Caroline said, laughing softly. "But only if you promise to help me pick a good one." "Deal?" "Deal." Jamie responded with a wide grin as he hurried to put on his sneakers. During the car ride to the mall, Jamie's excitement was infectious. He chatted non-stop about the kind of watch he envisioned for his father, a gift that would be practical yet meaningful, something his dad would cherish and wear daily. Caroline listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with encouraging remarks. When they arrived at the bustling shopping center, the lively atmosphere enveloped them. Bright lights reflected off polished floors, the sound of laughter and chatter mingled with the distant hum of music, and the enticing aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air. Jamie glanced around, overwhelmed but exhilarated. "Where do we start?" he asked eagerly. Caroline laughed, her eyes twinkling. "First, we eat. You can't make good decisions on an empty stomach." They settled into a quaint restaurant with plush seating and warm decor. Over a meal of Jamie's favorite burgers and fries, they laughed and discussed their plan. "So what's the strategy, Mr. Gift Planner?" Caroline teased, taking a sip of her iced tea. Jamie grinned sheepishly. "After this, I want to go straight to the watch store. I think Dad would like something classic. Nothing too flashy, just simple and elegant." Caroline gave him an approving nod. "I think that's a perfect choice. While I pay the bill, you can head to the store and start looking around." "Think you can handle it?" Jamie hesitated for a brief moment. "What if I picked the wrong one?" Caroline reached across the table to place a reassuring hand on his. "Trust yourself, Jamie. You know your dad better than anyone." Reassured by her confidence, Jamie nodded determinedly. "All right, I'll do my best." As Caroline settled the bill, Jamie walked ahead toward the watch store. The array of bright, stylish storefronts dazzled him, but he stayed focused. His steps quickened as he neared his destination, his heart pounding with anticipation. But the moment he entered the store, Jamie was struck by the quiet elegance of the place. Glass cases gleamed under soft lighting, showcasing an impressive collection of timepieces. Each watch seemed to exude sophistication, from sleek minimalist designs to intricate pieces with visible internal gears. Jamie moved closer to the displays, his fingers trailing lightly along the edges of the counters. "Would Dad like a leather or metal strap?" he murmured to himself, his mind running through his father's style and preferences. As he pondered over the choices, a faint feeling of unease crept over him. It was as though unseen eyes were following his every move. Glancing around, he saw nothing unusual. He shook his head, dismissing the thought as nerves. Refocusing on his task, Jamie scrutinized the watches meticulously. A simple brown leather strap caught his attention at first, but he dismissed it as too plain. Moving to the next display, he spotted a stainless steel design that seemed both discreet and classy. He leaned closer, trying to envision his dad's reaction to receiving it. "This one might work," Jamie whispered, carefully weighing his options. The uneasy feeling returned, stronger this time. He glanced up again, but the store's quietness seemed undisturbed. Determined not to let it distract him, he continued browsing, his resolve to find the perfect gift outweighing any discomfort. Finally, Jamie's eyes landed on a watch that seemed ideal. It had a black leather strap and a sleek, elegant face with just the right amount of sophistication. A small smile spread across his face. "This is the one," he thought. He reached out to call a salesperson for assistance, but before he could speak, a sharp, authoritative voice broke the tranquility. "What are you doing here, kid?" Jamie froze. The words were cold and accusatory, cutting through the air like a blade. He turned slowly to face the speaker, a tall, stern woman with a name tag that read Rachel. Her expression was severe, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized him from head to toe. Jamie swallowed hard, his confidence faltering under her gaze. "I'm picking out a gift for my dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel crossed her arms, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Do you even know where you are? These watches aren't for just anyone." Jamie's heart pounded in his chest as Rachel's words echoed in his mind. He stood frozen for a moment, trying to comprehend why she was addressing him with such hostility. He glanced down at his clothes, casual jeans, and a plain hoodie, wondering if they somehow made him look out of place. "Yes, I know where I am," he replied, attempting to sound confident, despite the quiver in his voice. "I've been saving up to buy a watch for my dad's birthday tomorrow." Rachel raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a cold, humorless smile. "Saving up?" she repeated, her tone laced with mockery. "From what? Your lunch money?" Jamie's cheeks flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. He gripped the strap of his bag tightly as if holding on to something solid could help steady him. "No," he said firmly, though his voice still wavered. "I've been saving for a while. I just want to get him something special." Rachel's sharp gaze swept over him again, her arms still crossed as she leaned in slightly. "Look, kid, this isn't some toy store. These watches cost more than what you probably have in your piggy bank." Jamie felt his throat tighten. He wanted to tell her about the extra chores he'd done for weeks to earn money, about how carefully he'd budgeted to make this purchase. But the words seemed to catch in his throat, weighed down by the indignity of the moment. "I have enough," he finally managed, his voice quieter than he intended. Rachel scoffed, her disbelief evident. "We get all kinds here," she muttered, half to herself. "Some people come in just to look around, maybe try to steal a glance, or worse." Her insinuation hit Jamie like a slap. His eyes widened as he realized what she was implying. "I'm not stealing anything," he exclaimed, his voice rising slightly. "I just want to buy a watch." Rachel didn't budge, her expression hard and unyielding. She stepped closer, her shadow looming over him. "That's what they all say," she replied coldly. "But it's my job to protect this store. And you look out of place." Jamie's breathing quickened. He felt the stares of the other customers and store staff, though no one seemed inclined to step in. The weight of their indifference pressed down on him, amplifying his isolation. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Jamie said, his voice trembling. "Why are you treating me like this?" Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head and made a subtle gesture toward the store's security guard, a tall, broad man stationed near the entrance. The guard immediately started walking toward them, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. Jamie's heart sank further. The situation felt surreal, like a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. "Please, I'm just trying to buy a gift," he said again, his desperation evident. The security guard stopped beside Rachel. His expression was neutral, but his presence was imposing. "Is it this one?" he asked, nodding toward Jamie. "Yes," Rachel replied curtly. "He's been acting suspiciously." Jamie raised his hand slightly in a defensive gesture, his voice cracking as he tried to explain. "I'm not acting suspiciously. I've been looking at the watches, that's all." The guard didn't seem interested in his protests. He stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Jamie's arm. "Come with me, kid," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jamie's eyes widened in shock as he tried to pull away. "Why are you grabbing me?" "I haven't done anything wrong," he shouted, his voice echoing in the now silent store. The other customers glanced over, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Some quickly looked away, unwilling to involve themselves. The isolation Jamie had felt earlier now consumed him entirely, leaving him with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. "Please, you're making a mistake," he pleaded, his voice barely audible. "I just wanted to buy a gift for my dad." Rachel crossed her arms, her expression one of smug satisfaction. "Kids like you always have a story," she said coolly. "They think they can just walk in here, cause trouble, and leave without consequences." Jamie's hands clenched into fists, not in anger, but in frustration and humiliation. "That's not true," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm not causing any trouble." The guard tightened his grip on Jamie's arm, pulling him toward the entrance. "Stay quiet, kid," he ordered. "We'll sort this out outside." Jamie's chest tightened, his breath coming in shallow gasps as tears threatened to spill. He looked around one last time, hoping for someone to step in to say something in his defense. But the bystanders remained silent, their gazes carefully averted. Just as Jamie thought he couldn't feel any lower, the store's door swung open and a commanding voice rang out. "What is going on here?" All eyes turned toward the entrance, where Caroline stood with a fierce expression. Her posture radiated authority, and her sharp gaze immediately sought out Jamie. The moment she spotted him being restrained by the guard, her face hardened with determination. "Mom!" Jamie exclaimed, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and desperation. Caroline strode forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She reached Jamie in seconds, placing a protective hand on his shoulder before fixing the guard and Rachel with a piercing glare. "Let go of my son," now she commanded, her voice low but filled with unmistakable resolve. The guard hesitated, glancing at Rachel for direction. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but Caroline silenced her with a raised hand. "I said, let him go," Caroline repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, the guard released Jamie's arm. Jamie immediately stepped closer to his mother, his heart still racing, but bolstered by her presence. Caroline's gaze shifted to Rachel, her expression unyielding. "Who do you think you are, treating my son this way?" she demanded. Rachel faltered, her earlier confidence wavering under Caroline's scrutiny. He was behaving suspiciously," she stammered. "I was following protocol." "Protocol?" Caroline interrupted sharply. "What kind of protocol involves humiliating a 14-year-old boy trying to buy a gift for his father?" Rachel shifted uneasily under Caroline's piercing gaze. Her confident demeanor had begun to unravel, replaced by an awkward mixture of defensiveness and unease. The store, once bustling with quiet murmurs and movement, now felt utterly silent as all eyes fixated on the unfolding confrontation. "I was just doing my job," Rachel managed, her voice trembling slightly. "We have to be cautious. This is a high-end store, and sometimes people come in with bad intentions." Caroline's jaw tightened, and her eyes narrowed. "Bad intentions? Is that what you think my son had when he walked into this store?" Rachel hesitated, glancing around as though searching for support, but none of the employees or customers seemed willing to meet her gaze. I mean it's nothing personal. Nothing personal?" Caroline interrupted, her voice cold as ice. "You judged my son the moment you saw him. You didn't ask his name. You didn't ask what he was doing here. You just assumed he didn't belong." Jamie, standing beside his mother, felt his cheeks flush with a mix of shame and admiration. He looked down at the floor, unable to fully process the whirlwind of emotions he was experiencing. Rachel opened her mouth to respond but faltered. Caroline stepped closer, her voice lowering but losing none of its intensity. "Let me make something very clear," she said. "I am not just Jamie's mother. I am a state senator. And as someone who has spent years fighting against prejudice and inequality, I can tell you right now that your actions today were completely unacceptable." The weight of Caroline's words seemed to hang in the air, pressing down on Rachel and the guard like a heavy stone. The security guard, who had been silent until now, shifted awkwardly, his expression a mix of guilt and discomfort. "I apologize," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I acted impulsively. I was just following orders." Caroline turned her sharp gaze toward him. "Following orders does not excuse you from treating someone with basic human decency," she said. "My son is a customer, just like anyone else who walks through those doors. Or do you think his age or his appearance makes him less deserving of respect?" The guard dropped his gaze to the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "No, ma'am," he said softly. Caroline exhaled slowly, her anger simmering but controlled. She turned back to Rachel, who now looked visibly shaken. "You owe my son an apology," Caroline said firmly. Rachel hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. I'm sorry," she finally said, though her tone still lacked genuine remorse. "I made a mistake." Jamie looked up at her, his emotions swirling. He wanted to accept her apology, but the memory of her cold accusations still stung deeply. Caroline's expression softened slightly as she glanced at Jamie. "It's your choice," she said gently. "You don't have to forgive her if you're not ready." Jamie swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Rachel and his mother. He took a deep breath, searching for the words. "I don't think I'll forget what happened today," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I don't want to carry this with me either, so I forgive you." Caroline placed a reassuring hand on Jamie's shoulder, pride evident in her eyes. "That's very mature of you," she said softly. Rachel nodded, her face a mixture of relief and discomfort. "Thank you," she said, though her voice still sounded unsure. Caroline straightened her posture, her commanding presence filling the room once more. "Let me be clear," she said, addressing both Rachel and the guard. "If I hear of anything like this happening again to my son or anyone else, I will make sure there are consequences. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," the guard said quickly, while Rachel nodded silently. Satisfied, Caroline turned her attention back to Jamie. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice now full of warmth. Jamie nodded, though his face was still pale. I just wanted to get Dad a nice gift," he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. Caroline pulled him into a comforting hug, stroking his hair gently. "I know, honey, and you did nothing wrong. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." When she pulled back, Caroline glanced at the display case that had originally captured Jamie's attention. She saw the watch he had chosen, a sleek design with a black leather strap and a clean, elegant face. "This is the one, isn't it?" she asked, pointing to it. Jamie nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, but I don't think I want it anymore." "Not from here." Caroline smiled, understanding his sentiment. "Then we'll find another store," she said firmly. "Someplace that will appreciate you as the thoughtful, amazing young man you are." Jamie managed a small smile, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Together, they turned and walked out of the store, leaving behind the oppressive atmosphere and judgmental gazes. The mall seemed brighter and more welcoming as they stepped back into the bustling corridor. Caroline held Jamie's hand tightly, her presence a comforting shield against the lingering memories of what had just happened. "Do you still want to find a watch for Dad?" she asked as they strolled past storefronts. Jamie hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yeah," he said softly. "I still want to make his birthday special." Caroline squeezed his hand, her smile full of pride. "That's my boy. Let's find the perfect one." They continued walking, determined to turn the painful experience into something positive. For Jamie, the day had been a harsh lesson about judgment and resilience. But as he glanced up at his mother's unwavering support, he knew he wasn't alone. The tension from the previous store still lingered as Jamie and Caroline walked through the mall. But with each step, the weight on Jamie's chest seemed to lift slightly. The vibrant energy of the shopping center, families chatting, couples laughing, and children racing down the polished floors helped shift his focus away from the humiliation he had endured. Caroline, ever attuned to her son's emotions, gently guided him toward a quieter section of the mall. She paused in front of a smaller store with a modest display in the window. Unlike the flashy elegance of the previous shop, this store had a welcoming charm, its soft lighting and warm tones making it feel more approachable. "How about we try here?" Caroline suggested, her tone encouraging. Jamie glanced at the storefront, noting the simple yet tasteful layout. It wasn't intimidating like the other place. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Okay, let's give it a shot." As they stepped inside, a friendly chime signaled their arrival. The ambiance was markedly different, calmer and more personal. The soft hum of instrumental music played in the background, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and leather. A salesperson, a kind-looking woman in her late 30s with a warm smile, approached them immediately. Her name tag read Elaine. "Good afternoon," Elaine greeted, her voice cheerful but gentle. "How can I help you today?" Caroline looked down at Jamie, encouraging him with a slight nod. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I'm looking for a gift," Jamie said, his voice steadier than he expected. "It's for my dad's birthday tomorrow. I want something special, classic, not too flashy, but something he'd really like." Elaine's smile grew, and her demeanor remained welcoming. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. Let's see what we can find for you." She gestured for them to follow her to a section of the store where various watches were displayed under glass cases. The collection was smaller than the one in the previous store, but Jamie immediately felt more at ease. Each watch was carefully curated, with styles ranging from modern minimalism to timeless classics. "What kind of strap do you think he'd prefer?" Elaine asked, glancing at Jamie. "Leather, metal, or something a bit different?" Jamie thought for a moment, visualizing his father. "Probably leather," he said. "He's always liked things that are simple and comfortable." Elaine nodded and pointed out a few options. "This one here has a dark brown leather strap and a clean design. It's understated but elegant. And this one has a black leather strap with subtle gold accents on the face, something a little more sophisticated." Jamie leaned closer to the display, studying each watch carefully. The black leather one caught his eye immediately. He could already imagine his dad wearing it, the subtle gold detailing adding just the right touch of class. "I think this is the one," Jamie said softly, pointing to it. Elaine smiled approvingly. "Excellent choice. Let me take it out so you can get a better look." As she unlocked the case and handed the watch to Jamie, he held it carefully, his fingers tracing the smooth leather strap and the polished face. A small smile crept onto his lips. "It's perfect," he murmured. Caroline stood beside him, her heart swelling with pride. She could see how much thought Jamie had put into this gift, how deeply he wanted to make his father happy. "It's beautiful, Jamie," she said gently. "Your dad is going to love it." Elaine took the watch back to prepare it for purchase, placing it in an elegant box lined with soft fabric. As she worked, she spoke to Jamie with genuine warmth. "You know, it's not often we see someone your age putting so much thought into a gift," Elaine said. "Your dad is lucky to have such a thoughtful son." Jamie blushed, his shy smile widening slightly. "I just want him to know how much I care," he said. Elaine nodded, her expression kind. "I'm sure he'll feel that the moment he opens it." When the transaction was complete, Elaine handed the box to Jamie, who held it as if it were a precious treasure. "Happy birthday to your dad," she said with a warm smile. "I hope he loves the watch." "Thank you," Jamie replied, his voice sincere. As they left the store, Jamie felt lighter, the weight of the earlier incident replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. He looked up at his mother, his gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thanks for helping me, Mom," he said softly. Caroline placed a hand on his shoulder, her smile gentle. "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. I'm just so proud of you for your kindness, your resilience, and your ability to rise above what happened earlier." Jamie nodded, though the memories of the confrontation with Rachel still lingered in the back of his mind. "I just hope Dad likes it," he said, his voice tinged with nervousness. Caroline chuckled lightly, a sound that eased the tension between them. "He's going to love it, Jamie. Not just because it's a beautiful watch, but because it's from you." They continued walking through the mall, the elegant box safely tucked in Jamie's hands. For the first time that day, he felt a sense of accomplishment, as though the hardships he had endured had only made this moment more meaningful. In the end, Jamie realized the gift wasn't just about the watch. It was about the love and effort he had poured into choosing it, the thoughtfulness that would undoubtedly shine through when his father unwrapped it. The journey to this point hadn't been easy. But as Jamie glanced at his mother's reassuring smile, he felt a quiet certainty that it had all been worth it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Jamie's bedroom window, painting the walls in warm hues of gold. He had barely slept the night before, his excitement and lingering nerves keeping him awake. The watch, now safely nestled in its elegant box, sat on his desk like a precious artifact. Jamie got up early, carefully dressing in a button-up shirt and a tie, which were choices for him, but ones he felt were appropriate for such a special occasion. He gave himself one last glance in the mirror, straightened his tie, and picked up the gift. Downstairs, the living room had been transformed. Caroline had spent the early morning decorating it with blue and gold balloons, streamers, and a simple yet elegant table set for their small family celebration. The aroma of freshly baked pastries wafted through the air, mingling with the faint hum of music playing softly in the background. When Caroline saw Jamie descending the stairs, her heart swelled with pride. She noticed the way he held the gift with both hands, as though it were the most important thing in the world. "Ready, champ?" she asked, her smile warm. Jamie nodded, his expression both nervous and excited. "Do you think he'll like it?" Caroline walked over and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "He's gonna love it, Jamie. Not just because it's a beautiful watch, but because it's from you." Before Jamie could respond, the door opened, and his father, Paul, stepped into the room. Paul's presence was like a burst of energy. He was always cheerful and warm. He froze momentarily, feigning surprise at the sight of the decorations. "What's all this?" Paul teased, his eyes twinkling as he took in the balloons and the table setting. Caroline laughed and gave him a playful nudge. "Don't act like you forgot your own birthday." Paul turned to Jamie, who was standing shyly by the table with the gift in hand. "And you, young man," Paul said, his voice full of affection. "What are you hiding there?" Jamie hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, his heart pounding. "I wanted to get you something special, Dad," he said softly, holding out the box. Paul took the gift, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Jamie, you didn't have to," he began, but Jamie interrupted, his voice firmer this time. "I wanted to," he said. "You mean so much to me, Dad. I wanted to give you something that shows that." The room fell silent as Paul carefully unwrapped the box. When he opened it and saw the watch, his eyes widened and his breath caught. He picked up the watch as though it were something fragile, holding it up to the light to admire its craftsmanship. "Jamie," Paul said, his voice thick with emotion. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful." Jamie smiled shyly, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "I know your old watch doesn't work well anymore, so I thought you'd like this one. I saved up for it. I wanted it to be something you'd really love." Paul took a deep breath, visibly moved. He looked at Caroline, who was standing nearby, her own eyes glistening with pride and emotion. Then he turned back to Jamie, slipping the watch onto his wrist. It fit perfectly, the black leather strap and elegant face complementing his style effortlessly. "It's perfect, Jamie," Paul said, his voice soft. "Every time I look at this watch, I'll think about how thoughtful and kind my son is. I can't even begin to tell you how much this means to me." Jamie felt tears well up in his eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness or frustration. They were tears of joy and relief, of knowing that his father truly appreciated his gesture. "I just wanted you to know how much I love you, Dad," Jamie said, his voice trembling slightly. Paul opened his arms, pulling Jamie into a tight embrace. "I already knew, son," he whispered. "I've always known. But now I have something to remind me of it every day." Caroline joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them in a warm, family hug. "We're a team," she said softly, kissing Jamie's forehead. "Always." As the celebration continued, Paul proudly showed off his new watch to every relative who arrived, recounting the story of Jamie's thoughtfulness with beaming pride. Jamie, sitting beside Caroline, felt a deep sense of peace. He knew the experience at the mall had left a mark on him. It wasn't something he could easily forget, but as he watched his father's joy and felt his mother's unwavering support, he realized something important. The love and strength of his family could overshadow even the darkest moments. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Paul found Jamie sitting on the couch, looking thoughtful. "Hey, kiddo," Paul said, sitting down beside him. I wanted to thank you again for today. That watch, it's more than just a gift. It's a reminder of how incredible you are." Jamie looked up at his father, his expression earnest. "I just wanted to make you happy, Dad. That's all." Paul ruffled Jamie's hair affectionately. "You did, son. More than you know." The two of them sat together in comfortable silence, the watch on Paul's wrist gleaming softly in the dim light. It wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol of their bond and a testament to the love that connected their family even in the face of challenges. As the house settled into a quiet hum after the celebration, Caroline remained in the kitchen, tidying up the remnants of the party. Her movements were methodical, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about everything that had transpired at the mall, the judgment Jamie had endured, the confrontation with Rachel, and the resolve Jamie had shown in the face of such unfair treatment. Paul entered the room, his shirt slightly untucked, a relaxed glow on his face from the joyous day. But when he saw Caroline's introspective expression, his brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" Paul asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. Caroline sighed deeply, setting down the stack of plates she had been holding. "There's something I need to tell you about what happened yesterday, when Jamie and I went to get your gift," she began hesitantly. Paul leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening," he said, his tone gentle but curious. Caroline recounted the events of the previous day in vivid detail. The excitement Jamie had felt as he browsed the store, the unwarranted scrutiny from Rachel, the humiliating accusations, and how Jamie had ultimately chosen to forgive. As she spoke, Paul's expression shifted from disbelief to sorrow and finally to a deep, simmering anger. "He went through all of that?" Paul asked, his voice quiet but laden with emotion. Caroline nodded. "He did, and he handled it better than most adults would. He's stronger than I realized, Paul, stronger than I ever gave him credit for." Paul was silent for a moment, his jaw tight. Then he straightened up and walked into the living room, where Jamie was sitting on the couch, scrolling absent-mindedly on his phone. "Jamie," Paul said, his voice firm yet kind. "Can you come here for a minute?" Jamie looked up, startled by the serious tone in his father's voice. He set his phone aside and stood, walking over to where Paul stood by the stairs. Caroline followed, her presence a silent reassurance as Paul gestured for Jamie to sit with him. "Your mom told me what happened at the store yesterday," Paul began, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. Jamie's face flushed, and he looked down at his hands. "Dad, I didn't mean for it to happen like that," he said quietly. "I just wanted to get you something special." Paul reached over and gently placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder, prompting him to look up. "Jamie, listen to me," he said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing. What happened wasn't your fault." Jamie hesitated, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It didn't feel that way," he admitted. "They treated me like I didn't belong there." Paul's grip on Jamie's shoulder tightened slightly, his expression one of both pride and frustration. "That says a lot more about them than it does about you," he said. "The way they judged you, the way they acted, it was wrong. And it had nothing to do with who you are. You are kind, thoughtful, and stronger than I think even you realize." Caroline, standing nearby, added softly, "Jamie, the world isn't always fair, but what matters is how you respond to those moments of unfairness. And yesterday, you showed incredible strength and grace. I'm so proud of you." Jamie looked between his parents, their words slowly sinking in. It hurt," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I wanted to do something good, something nice, and they made me feel like I shouldn't have even tried." Paul sighed deeply, his eyes filled with both sadness and pride. "I know it hurt, son, and I'm sorry you had to go through that, but you didn't let it stop you. You didn't let them take away what makes you who you are. That's what matters." Jamie nodded slowly, his emotions raw but beginning to settle. "I just hope I can be as strong as you and Mom," he said quietly. Paul smiled softly, his hand still resting on Jamie's shoulder. "You already are, Jamie, more than you know." For a moment the three of them sat in silence, the weight of the conversation easing into a quiet understanding. Caroline walked over and sat beside Jamie, wrapping her arms around him. "We'll always be here for you," she said gently, "no matter what." Jamie leaned into her embrace, feeling a warmth that began to replace the sting of the previous day's events. As the evening wore on, Jamie felt lighter, as though a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had finally been lifted. The love and support of his parents had reminded him that, no matter what challenges he faced, he wasn't alone. Paul glanced at the watch on his wrist, admiring its simplicity and elegance. But more than the watch itself, it was what it represented that struck him deeply. He turned to Jamie one last time that night, his voice full of emotion. "You know, every time I look at this watch," Paul said, "I'm not just going to think about how thoughtful you were to get it for me. I'm going to think about how strong and incredible my son is. And that's something I'll carry with me forever." Jamie smiled, the warmth in his chest growing. He realized that despite the hardships of the day before, he had gained something invaluable. A deeper understanding of himself, his family, and the resilience they shared. The days following Paul's birthday passed quietly, but the events at the mall lingered in Jamie's mind like a shadow. Although his father had reassured him, and his mother's unwavering defense had given him strength, there was something about the experience that felt unresolved. One evening, as the family sat together after dinner, Paul noticed Jamie's quiet demeanor. Jamie had been twirling his fork idly, staring into space. "Jamie," Paul said, his tone gentle, "you've been awfully quiet these past few days. What's on your mind?" Jamie looked up, startled, and then shrugged. "I don't know," he said softly. "I've just been thinking about what happened at the store." Caroline, who had been folding napkins nearby, paused and gave Jamie her full attention. "What about it, sweetheart?" Jamie hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I keep thinking about what Rachel said," he admitted. "She acted like I didn't belong there, like I didn't have a right to be in that store." Paul leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "And how did that make you feel?" Jamie took a deep breath, his emotions bubbling to the surface. "Small," he said finally. "Like no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't be enough. Like I wasn't enough." Caroline's heart ached at her son's honesty. She moved to sit beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Jamie," she said, her voice steady, "there are people in this world who judge others unfairly. They make assumptions based on things that don't matter, like your age, how you look, or even what you're wearing. But those judgments are never about you. They're about their own flaws and insecurities." Paul nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Your mom's right. The problem wasn't you, Jamie. It was them. People like Rachel see the world through a narrow lens. It's easier for them to judge than to take the time to understand. That doesn't make it okay, but it does mean you shouldn't carry the weight of their opinions." Jamie listened intently, his parents' words slowly easing the knot in his chest. "But what if it happens again?" he asked quietly. Paul smiled, a gentle but determined expression on his face. "Then you remember who you are. You remember what your mom and I have always told you. You are smart, kind, and capable. No one can take that away from you, no matter how hard they try." Caroline added, "And if it does happen again, you have the tools to handle it. You showed us that when you chose forgiveness over anger. That's something most people struggle with their whole lives, Jamie. You've already proven how strong you are." Jamie looked down at his hands, a small smile beginning to form. "It still feels unfair," he admitted. "It is unfair," Paul agreed, his voice tinged with sadness. "But life isn't always fair. What matters is how you respond to those moments of unfairness. And Jamie, you responded with grace and integrity. That's something to be proud of." The family sat in silence for a moment, the air heavy with understanding. Then Paul spoke again, his tone lighter. "You know," he said, glancing at the watch on his wrist, "every time I look at this, I think about what you went through to get it. And it reminds me of just how incredible you are." Jamie smiled, his heart swelling with warmth. He looked at his father and then at Caroline, realizing just how much their support meant to him. "Thanks, Dad." "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. "For everything." Caroline hugged him tightly. "We'll always be here for you, Jamie. No matter what." Over the next few days, Jamie found himself reflecting on his parents' words. He began to see the experience at the mall not just as a moment of pain, but as an opportunity for growth. He thought about the courage it had taken to forgive Rachel, even when she didn't deserve it, and the strength it had taken to stand tall despite the humiliation. One afternoon, Jamie was sitting in the living room when Caroline joined him with a thoughtful expression. "Jamie," she began, "I've been thinking about what happened at the store. And I want you to know that what you went through wasn't just about you. It's part of a bigger problem. A problem with how some people see others who they think don't fit in." Jamie tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" Caroline took a deep breath. "As a senator, I've spent a lot of time fighting against prejudice and inequality. What happened to you is something that happens to people all the time, in different ways. It's not right and it's not fair, but it's something we can work to change." Jamie's eyes widened slightly. "How?" "By speaking up," Caroline said. "By sharing your story. Sometimes, showing people what it feels like to be judged unfairly can open their eyes and make them think twice before doing it again." Jamie considered her words, a sense of purpose beginning to take root in his mind. "Do you think it would help?" he asked. Caroline smiled, her pride evident. "I do. And I think you have a lot to teach people, Jamie, not just about standing up to unfairness, but about forgiveness and strength." Jamie nodded slowly, the idea resonating with him. He realized that while he couldn't change what had happened, he could use his experience to make a difference. As the evening approached, Jamie sat down to write about what had happened to him, not just the pain, but the lessons he had learned. He didn't know where his words would go, or who might read them, but he felt a sense of relief as he put pen to paper. With each word, Jamie felt a little stronger, a little more certain that he could turn his experience into something meaningful. He wasn't just a boy who had been judged unfairly. He was a boy who had risen above it, who had chosen resilience over bitterness, and who had learned that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. As the weeks went by, Jamie's story began to take shape. With his mother's encouragement, he decided to share his experience in a way that could inspire others. He wrote about the events at the mall, the excitement of picking out a gift for his dad, the humiliation he felt at being judged, and the strength he found in forgiveness. At first, Jamie wasn't sure if anyone would care about his story, but Caroline reminded him that sometimes the most personal stories had the greatest impact. "It's not just about what happened to you," she told him one evening. "It's about what people can learn from it. Your voice matters, Jamie, more than you know." With her help, Jamie finished a letter that would later be shared with a local community group. He wrote with honesty and vulnerability, describing not just the pain, but also the resilience he had discovered within himself. When he handed the letter to Caroline, she read it carefully, her eyes misting with pride as she reached the final lines. "This is powerful, Jamie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you for doing this." Jamie smiled shyly. "I just want people to understand what it feels like. Maybe it'll make them think twice before they judge someone." "That's exactly why this matters," Caroline replied. A week later, Jamie's story was shared at a local community forum that Caroline attended as part of her work. The forum was focused on addressing bias and creating more inclusive spaces. When Jamie's letter was read aloud, the room fell silent, the words resonating deeply with everyone present. Caroline watched as the audience listened intently, their expressions shifting from shock to empathy. When the reading was finished, a few people approached her, expressing how moved they were by Jamie's courage and insight. "This kind of honesty is what we need more of," one woman said. "Your son is remarkable." Caroline beamed with pride, knowing that Jamie's words had already begun to make a difference. Meanwhile, Jamie had his own quiet victories. At school, he started noticing little changes in how he interacted with his classmates. When he heard someone making a judgmental comment or teasing another student, he found himself speaking up, gently but firmly. "That's not cool," he said one day when a peer made a rude remark about someone's clothes. "You don't know their story." The response wasn't always immediate, but Jamie could see that his words left an impression. It felt good to stand up for what he believed in, to use his experience as a reminder that everyone deserved respect. One evening after dinner, Paul sat down with Jamie in the living room. He had been wearing the watch Jamie had given him every day since his birthday, and it had quickly become one of his most cherished possessions. "You know," Paul began, "this watch has become more than just a gift to me." Jamie looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" Paul smiled, his hand resting on the watch as he spoke. Every time I look at it, I think about what you went through to get it. It reminds me of how brave you are, how much you've grown, and how much love you have in your heart." Jamie felt his cheeks flush with warmth. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, "but I'm glad I did it. It feels like it mattered." "It did matter," Paul said firmly. "And not just to me. You're learning something that takes most people years to figure out, that we can take hard experiences and turn them into something meaningful." Jamie thought about his father's words, realizing how true they were. The pain and humiliation he had felt that day at the mall had been difficult to endure, but it had taught him something valuable. It had shown him the importance of kindness, resilience, and standing up for what was right. As the days turned into weeks, Jamie found himself growing more confident. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, and he carried himself with a quiet strength that others couldn't help but notice. One afternoon, Caroline approached him with an idea. "Jamie," she said, "how would you feel about speaking at an event with me? It's a community gathering, and I think your story would be powerful." Jamie hesitated, his initial instinct being to shy away from the spotlight. But then he remembered how his words had already made an impact when they were shared at the forum. "Do you think it would help?" he asked. Caroline smiled. "I do. I think a lot of people could learn from you, Jamie." After some thought, Jamie agreed. He spent the next week preparing, with Caroline and Paul helping him practice. When the day of the event arrived, Jamie stood nervously at the edge of the stage, clutching the speech he had written. "You've got this," Paul said, giving him a reassuring pat on the back. When Jamie stepped onto the stage and looked out at the audience, his nerves began to fade. He spoke with honesty, sharing not just the details of what had happened at the mall, but also the lessons he had learned. "I thought that day was going to be one of the worst days of my life," Jamie said, his voice steady. "But it ended up teaching me something important. I learned that people's judgments don't define me. And I learned that forgiveness is stronger than anger." When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Jamie felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. As he stepped down from the stage, Caroline and Paul were waiting for him, their smiles full of love and admiration. "You were incredible," Caroline said, pulling him into a hug. Paul nodded. "You didn't just tell your story, Jamie. You made a difference." Jamie smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment he hadn't expected. He realized that by sharing his story, he had turned a painful experience into something positive, not just for himself, but for others, too. As they walked home that evening, Jamie felt lighter than he had in weeks. He had faced prejudice and judgment, but he had come out stronger, and with his family by his side, he knew he could handle anything that came his way. As Jamie's story gained attention, he began to see the ripple effect of his actions. His words resonated with people in his community and beyond, sparking conversations about fairness, prejudice, and the courage it took to forgive. Despite the positive impact, Jamie still grappled with the emotions tied to that day at the mall. One quiet afternoon, Jamie sat with his mother in their living room. Caroline was reviewing papers for an upcoming Senate meeting, but she noticed Jamie staring out the window, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" Caroline asked, setting her work aside. Jamie turned to her, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Do you think Rachel ever really felt sorry?" he asked. Caroline frowned slightly, considering her response. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes people apologize because they feel obligated to, not because they truly understand what they've done wrong." Jamie nodded, his expression contemplative. "I forgave her," he said quietly. "But sometimes I wonder if I should have." Caroline shifted closer to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook, Jamie," she said. "It's about freeing yourself from the anger and pain they caused. You forgave Rachel not because she deserved it, but because you chose to rise above her actions. That takes strength, and it's something not everyone can do." Jamie let her words sink in, realizing that forgiving Rachel hadn't been for her. It had been for him. It was his way of moving forward, of refusing to let her behavior define how he saw himself. "I guess that makes sense," he said finally. "It still feels hard, though." "It always will, sweetheart," Caroline said gently. "But the fact that you chose forgiveness in the first place shows just how strong you are." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Caroline stood and opened it to find a courier holding a small envelope. After signing for it, she returned to Jamie and handed him the envelope with a curious smile. "It's addressed to you," she said. Jamie took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note on simple stationery. As he read it, his eyebrows furrowed and his lips pressed into a thin line. "What does it say?" Caroline asked. Jamie hesitated before handing her the note. She read it aloud. "Dear Jamie, I want to apologize again for the way I treated you that day at the store. I've thought about it a lot since then, and I realize how wrong I was. My actions were unfair and hurtful, and I am truly sorry. You showed more maturity and kindness than I deserved, and for that, I am grateful. I hope you can continue to share your story because it's one the world needs to hear. Sincerely, Rachel." Caroline looked up at Jamie, her eyes filled with surprise and a hint of pride. "She reached out to you," she said softly. Jamie nodded, still processing the words. "I didn't expect that," he admitted. "What do you think about what she wrote?" Caroline asked. Jamie stared at the note for a long moment before responding. I think she means it this time," he said. "It feels different from when she apologized in the store." Caroline smiled. "That's because she's had time to reflect. Sometimes it takes people longer to understand the impact of their actions." Jamie folded the note carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. "I'm glad she apologized," he said. "But even if she hadn't, I think I'd still be okay." Caroline wrapped an arm around him, her pride evident. "That's because you've already found your strength, Jamie. You don't need her apology to validate who you are. But it's still a good thing that she took responsibility for what happened." Jamie nodded, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. The note was a small gesture, but it carried weight. It was a reminder that people could change, and that even those who had wronged him could learn and grow. Later that evening, as Jamie sat at his desk, he decided to write a response. He kept it short but heartfelt. "Dear Rachel, thank you for your note. It means a lot to me that you took the time to reflect on what happened and to apologize. I've learned a lot from that day, and I hope you have too. Forgiveness is hard, but it's also important. I wish you all the best. Sincerely, Jamie." When he sealed the envelope, Jamie felt a sense of peace. He didn't know if Rachel would ever fully understand the impact of her actions, but he knew that he had done his part to move forward. In the days that followed, Jamie continued to grow in confidence. He found himself speaking up more, not just for himself but for others who were facing judgment or unfair treatment. He became a quiet but powerful advocate in his school and community, using his own experience to show that kindness and understanding could make a difference. Paul and Caroline watched their son with pride, amazed at how much he had grown. One evening, as they sat together as a family, Paul turned to Jamie and said, "You know, you've taught us a lot too." "Me?" Jamie asked, surprised. "Yes, you," Paul said with a smile. "You've shown us what real strength looks like. It's not about being the loudest or the toughest. It's about having the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard." Jamie smiled, his heart swelling with pride. For the first time, he truly believed in his own strength. As the evening turned into night, Jamie sat by the window, gazing at the stars. He thought about how much had changed since that day at the mall. The pain was still there, but it had transformed into something meaningful. A lesson in resilience, forgiveness, and the power of standing tall in the face of adversity. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but with his family by his side and the strength he had discovered within himself, Jamie felt ready to face whatever came next. As time passed, Jamie's story continued to echo in his life, shaping his journey in unexpected ways. It became a quiet part of who he was, a reminder of what he had endured and the lessons he had learned. But it also became a part of how others saw him, as the boy who had chosen forgiveness over anger, resilience over defeat. One sunny afternoon, Caroline received a call at the office that would change everything for Jamie. The community group that had read Jamie's letter months ago had reached out with an invitation, an opportunity for him to speak at a statewide event focused on youth leadership and social justice. It was a big step, one that could take Jamie's message further than he had ever imagined. Caroline sat down with Jamie that evening, telling him about the invitation. They want you to speak, Jamie, she said with a smile. It's a chance to share your story with a wider audience. Kids from all over the state who could learn from your experience. Jamie's eyes widened in surprise. Me? Speak at a statewide event? Caroline nodded. Yes. They've heard your story and think you have something important to say. What do you think? Jamie felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Public speaking had never been his thing, and the thought of standing before so many people was both thrilling and intimidating. But deep down, he knew that this was another opportunity to share the strength he had gained and to encourage others to find their own. I think I want to do it, he said after a moment, his voice firm. Caroline smiled, her pride clear. I knew you would. This is going to be incredible, Jamie. You're going to inspire so many people. The weeks leading up to the event were filled with preparation. Caroline and Paul helped Jamie refine his speech, offering support and encouragement every step of the way. Jamie wrote, rewrote, and practiced, growing more comfortable with each passing day. The words flowed more easily now, as though his story had taken root in his heart and mind, ready to be shared. When the day of the event finally arrived, Jamie stood backstage, peering out at the large crowd that had gathered in the auditorium. The room was filled with teenagers, educators, and advocates, all eager to hear the voices of young people who were making a difference in their communities. You're ready for this, Caroline said, her voice steady and reassuring. Jamie took a deep breath, his nerves still present but no longer overwhelming. I think I can do this. He stepped onto the stage, the bright lights illuminating him, and for a moment he was frozen. But then he saw his parents sitting in the front row, their eyes filled with pride and love. Their support gave him the courage to begin. Hi everyone, Jamie began, his voice steady as he addressed the audience. My name is Jamie, and I'm here today to talk about something I never thought I would have to face. It's a story about judgment, about forgiveness, and about finding strength in the hardest of moments. The room grew silent as Jamie shared his story, his journey from feeling humiliated and judged in that high-end store to choosing forgiveness and rising above the prejudice he had faced. He spoke about the lessons he had learned and the strength he had discovered within himself. As he spoke, Jamie's nerves began to fade. His words were no longer just his own. They were a message to everyone in the room, a reminder that no one should be judged based on their appearance or circumstances. And just as importantly, a reminder that forgiveness and empathy are the keys to healing and change. I know what it feels like to be judged by someone who doesn't understand you, Jamie continued. But I also know what it feels like to choose to rise above that, to choose to forgive and move forward. And that's what I want everyone to remember, that you have the power to decide how you react to injustice, and you have the power to make the world a better place by showing kindness, empathy, and understanding. The audience sat in rapt attention, many of them nodding in agreement. When Jamie finished speaking, there was a long, heartfelt silence before the room erupted into applause. Jamie felt a swell of emotion rise in his chest. He had done it. He had shared his story, and it had made a difference. After the event, several people approached Jamie, thanking him for his words and telling him how deeply they had been moved by his story. For the first time, Jamie realized just how far-reaching his impact could be. His story had the power to inspire others, to change minds, and to create a ripple of kindness that extended beyond his own experience. As Jamie and his parents left the auditorium that day, Caroline wrapped her arm around him. I'm so proud of you, she said. You were incredible. Paul nodded, his voice thick with emotion. You did it, Jamie. You showed everyone what real strength looks like. Jamie smiled, his heart full. I think I'm starting to believe it now, too. Later that evening, as Jamie sat on the porch, looking out at the stars, he thought about everything he had been through. The pain, the judgment, the humiliation, it all seemed so far away now, as though it had been part of a different chapter in his life. What mattered now was who he had become and the lessons he had learned. He wasn't just the boy who had been judged at the mall. He was the boy who had chosen to rise above it. He was the boy who had chosen forgiveness over anger, kindness over bitterness. And he was ready to continue using his voice to make a difference in the world. As he looked up at the sky, Jamie felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had the strength to face them. And he knew that with his family by his side, there was nothing he couldn't overcome. Jamie's journey isn't just a story about a boy buying a gift for his dad. It's a story that resonates with themes of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of standing up against prejudice. Through his quiet courage, Jamie transformed an experience of humiliation into an opportunity for growth, not only for himself, but for everyone who heard his story. What makes Jamie's actions remarkable isn't just his choice to forgive, but his decision to share his vulnerability. It reminds us that even when faced with unfairness, we have the power to rise above anger and bitterness. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing wrongdoing. It means choosing not to let the pain define us. In the end, Jamie's journey shows the importance of family as a source of strength and love. With his mother's unwavering support and his father's heartfelt encouragement, Jamie learned that he didn't have to face challenges alone. Their belief in him reminded us all of how vital it is to surround ourselves with people who lift us up and see the best in us, even in our darkest moments. This story also shines a light on an important societal issue, the harm of judging others based on appearances. Rachel's actions at the store reflected a bias that many people face every day, and it serves as a reminder for all of us to approach others with empathy rather than assumptions. Only by listening and understanding can we create a world that is truly inclusive and kind. For anyone watching this video, Jamie's story invites reflection. How would you respond in his place? Would you have the strength to forgive? Would you stand tall in the face of unfairness? These are questions that challenge us to think deeply about our own character and actions. If this story moves you, we want to hear your thoughts. Was it inspiring? Did it remind you of a time you faced a similar challenge? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was amazing, comment with a 2. And we'd love to hear your own stories of resilience and courage. Share them with us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the meaningful stories we'll share next. Together, we can create a community where kindness, empathy, and understanding thrive. Let us know what you took away from Jamie's journey, and thank you for being a part of this one.